In an ever-changing world, Life Changes Network presents a voice of truth and inspiration, broadcasting on frequencies of love, laughter, and understanding, illuminating new paths for new directions, as we, as one, strive for higher and higher planes of existence. Always remembering, life changes. This is radio like you've never felt before, and now your host, our MC, our master of change, Filippo Voltaggio.
Thank you, Mark. Sounds like your voice is changing.
I think so.
Sorry about that. I just had to say that. But thank you for being on, even though you're not feeling your greatest, and introducing the show. And actually, thank you for bringing us Andrew Behar, who is the CEO of an organization called As You Sow, which is an environmental advocacy group. And this is interesting because I've been in this field now for many years, and this is the first time I've heard of this. So it's exciting to me not only to be sharing this information with all of you, but for me to be learning it as well. And it gives me great hope and also great pleasure to be hosting this show today with our guest, Andrew Behar, who I can't wait to bring on in just a moment. Now, you know, it's interesting because I've been wanting to talk about something for a long time, and I've either forgotten or other things have taken precedent, and I haven't had the opportunity to do so. And as I was saying to myself, I've got to do it this coming Monday. I've just got to talk about that because I find it very important. How uncanny it is that it aligns so perfectly with what our guest is going to be talking about today. Now, I have a friend also, thanks to Mark Lejeune, who brought Thomas Baylor, who you all know his music, actually. He's written music for Michael Jackson, and he was one of the producers for You Are the World, and gosh, I'm trying to remember, Cuts Like a Knife, I think that's the name of the song that he wrote that Michael Jackson made a big hit out of. And so he's a big man out in the world of music, and he was asked to co-produce a song, let's call it a song, a musical work maybe is better title for it. But he was asked to co-produce this thing, and then he shared it with me. It still wasn't done, but he sent me a link, and he said, Filippo, listen to this. And I heard something on it I had never heard before, which goes to show that what people are doing out there, like this show, what he's doing is he took a moment in history that I didn't know about it, but happened in the world that was very important to a lot of people and very important to me, and immortalized it in this song. And it was actually a speech by a prime minister of all things. And it had happened over a year, I think, before they put this song together. And they actually used this speech in the song. And I listened to this speech, and I was speechless, actually. I actually came to tears to think of the implications. So what was the speech? It was the Australian Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd's, apologizing to the Aborigines. And it happened on February 13th, 2008, in Parliament. Passed. And the reactions of the people and the reactions of people throughout the world who knew about this just really got me. And listening to the way the music worked around this speech, they used sound bites from the speech to create this song. And every once in a while, there was a group of children and a group of Aborigines and a didgeridoo player in this music. And I wish we could play the song. I didn't think of it. And when I did, I contacted Thomas Baylor, but obviously he's out of town or something because he hasn't gotten back to me. But someday, hopefully, we'll be able to play it. But why is this important? Well, what happened to me while listening to that song, it was a long song, and I actually played it several times. And I don't remember if I was tired or actually what I do usually is I close my eyes when I'm really listening to a piece of music, because as a musician, as a singer, and as one who has recorded, as you close your eyes and you just try and hear all the separate instruments and you try and make it all work, whatever. So I played this piece over and over again, and as I was really taking it in, I had my eyes closed. At one point, as I was listening to the Australian Prime Minister apologize to Indigenous people, something that, as far as I know, has never happened before, that these two worlds were coming together, and this greater world, so to speak, was recognizing the greatness of the world that existed before them, and apologizing for having killed generations, psychologically, emotionally, and in so many ways physically as well, these generations of Aborigines, and realizing and come to the understanding that they had deprived Australia and Australians of this generation the great history and the greatness that could have come from a collaborative effort. And I had this, I either fell asleep and had a dream, or I had a vision, or I had a thought, but it was very profound. And what I was hearing in my head or in the dream or whatever it was is I heard the president of Coca-Cola apologizing for the chemicals that they were putting out into the water, or they were putting in the cans or whatever, and Kraft apologizing for fake cheese and all the things that they were doing, and I heard General Motors apologizing for forcing oil down our throats, almost literally, instead of finding a collaborative solution using solar power or battery power or whatever it is, but just pushing their agenda. And one after the other, these companies and these people of this great, quote unquote, civilized world was apologizing to the people, saying, we did wrong, and from now on, we will work together. And that's a vision I have held for a long time. And meeting Andrew and getting to speak to him today kind of brought that home. And it's interesting that I was going to talk about this anyway. We don't have the music to play for you, the song that I was talking about, but I would like to have our engineer Seth play about a minute and a half of this apology, which, if it didn't, should have rung across the world. And hopefully we are helping continue 2 years later, over 2 years later, showing what is possible. Seth, could you roll that tape for us, please?
I move that. Today we honour the Indigenous peoples of this land, the oldest continuing cultures in human history. We reflect on their past mistreatment. We reflect in particular on the mistreatment of those who were stolen generations, this blemished chapter in our national history. The time has now come for the nation to turn a new page in Australia's history by righting the wrongs of the past and so moving forward with confidence to the future. We apologise for the laws and policies of successive parliaments and governments that have inflicted profound grief, suffering and loss on these our fellow Australians. We apologise especially for the removal of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children from their families, their communities and their country, for the pain, suffering and hurt of these stolen generations, their descendants and for their families left behind. We say sorry. To the mothers and the fathers, the brothers and the sisters, for the breaking up of families and communities, we say sorry. And for the indignity and degradation thus inflicted on a proud people and a proud culture, we say sorry. We, the Parliament of Australia, respectfully request that this apology be received in the spirit in which it is offered, as part of the healing of the nation. For the future, we take heart, resolving that this new page in the history of our great continent can now be written. We today take this first step by acknowledging the past and laying claim to a future that embraces all Australians. A future where this Parliament resolves that the injustices of the past must never, never happen again. A future where we harness the
Never, never happen again. And with that, in the spirit of how that rings out into the world, I am happy to be host of Life Changes with Filippo, together with Mark Lejeune and Dorothy Donahue and Mark Greger, in putting out these kinds of messages, and want to remind you all that you can learn more about us at lifechanges.ws and come hear about us and hear what we share at on the BBS radio network every Monday night at 7 p.m. With that, it's perfect time to bring on our guest, who is, as I mentioned before, Andrew Behar, who is the CEO of an organization called As You Sow, and who has for 30 years of experience as a senior executive and strategist in the clean tech, communications, and life science sectors. And prior to joining As You Sow, Andrew founded and was CEO of a clean tech startup developing innovative fuel cell technologies. He served as COO for a social media agency focused in the sustainability space and has been a strategic consultant in the nonprofit sector. He has founded and run startups in the medical device and communication areas and serves on the boards of several high-tech innovation companies. Now, let me tell you really quickly a little bit about As You Sow. It was founded on the belief that an overwhelming majority of environmental and human rights abuses are due to corporate negligence and policies that stress short-term profits. Their work since 1992 has addressed this theme broadly, and they have worked diligently on specific issues to bring corporate decision-making into integrity. They have challenged the commonly held belief that these enterprises are too big to change, and they have succeeded through persistence and honesty time and again. We are happy to be supporting the efforts of As You Grow. Welcome, Andrew Behar, to the show.
Hi.
Hi. How's that for way of introduction?
That's quite an introduction to hear that speech. Also, it's quite an introduction. It's a lot of history there.
What about my dream or fantasy? Could there be any truth there, or is it happening and we don't know about it yet? Is it in the horizon, maybe?
I think it's happening in small ways, in incremental steps, continuously. I mean, I think that's what we do at As You Sow. We work with corporations to bring them into integrity, and the way we do that is from the angle of being a shareholder, of actually owning shares of a corporation and going to management, going to the board, going to the annual meeting and saying we think there should be some changes. And I think it's really important for people to realize the power that they have as consumers and as shareholders of these corporations to actually to make change. And so, yeah, but that's how we look at it. When we, like for instance, right now we're working on issues around coal. We're actually filing resolutions with 12 coal-burning utilities right now. We work in the area of hydraulic fracturing, which is a method of extracting natural gas from the earth that has all kinds of environmental consequences that are yet unknown. And we're filing with companies like Exxon and Chevron and Anadarko and Ultra Petroleum. We also work with companies in the recycling area. So that's both electronic waste, so We've done a lot of work with HP and Dell and Apple and Best Buy to get them to actually recycle electronic waste, not send it to the landfill. And also with companies like Coke and Pepsi, Nestle Water, who make a lot of plastic bottles. They make close to globally there's 200 billion plastic bottles made every year, and we're working with those companies to actually recycle and to rethink the whole methodology of production. So we do a lot of work with a lot of companies. We're working on, in the toxics area, on a chemical called bisphenol A that probably a lot of people have heard of, called BPA, that is still in a lot of products, although as publicity came out around the fact that this chemical was in baby bottles and sippy cups, parents just simply stopped buying those products. They literally went off the market. And that showed, to me, that really shows the power of the consumer, that they could literally, in a very short time, eliminate products that had this chemical in it. So, I have great hope that there is change. I believe that corporations want to be in a state of integrity. I think that they sometimes just need a little prodding to get there.
Well, it's interesting that the prodding that you do, it actually ends up serving the companies, and you have plenty of examples of that. It's not like the companies see you coming and say, "Oh God, here they are." Well, they might say that, but you also end up helping the bottom line for the companies too, while you're still serving the people and the planet, right?
Absolutely. I mean, for instance, when we filed with Home Depot to stop using old growth lumber, we filed and we presented an economic alternative. You can use timber that is grown in a responsible way, and you don't have to cut down the old redwoods, and you'll actually make more money. You'll actually solve this problem, and you'll actually have a PR. It'd be very good PR for the company. And also at the time, there were a lot of activist groups, Rainforest Action Network, Sierra Club, were protesting, and were stopping people, in this. From going into their stores. So they had a problem that they could solve very easily. They just needed to see the solution, and that's what we do. We come in and we can, as shareholders, we want the company to prosper. Best Buy, the fact that they adopted this recycling plan, they became their whole marketing plan. If you see those giant e-waste signs that they put up, and when people go and bring their old VCRs in, they tend to go inside the store and buy something new. They're finding that it's actually a great marketing tool, and that's what we're now trying to convince Walmart and Target and other companies that sell electronics to do the same. And they'll come around. They'll see that this is the right thing to do, that you don't want to put electronics into the landfill, that there's heavy metals in the boards that go into the water that eventually make it into human beings and cause a lot of degradation. So it's a win-win. There's win-wins all over the place, and all the other Dell, HP, Apple, IBM, they're all having this recycling programs that it's all win-win. So in some cases it's difficult for the company to see that. When we talk to a coal company about how are they dealing with storing their coal ash, that's a tougher conversation. When we talk to companies about how they're extracting natural gas using hydraulic fracturing, that's a more difficult conversation. I mean, in that case, we're asking them just for information about what are they pumping into the ground. The way hydraulic fracturing or fracking it works is that there's these giant fields of shale, like all the way from upstate New York, up like Ithaca, all the way down through all of Pennsylvania and Ohio, and hidden, like in the shale, there's natural gas, and so what the companies do is they just drill a very deep hole, like 8,000 feet down, and they pump about 4 million gallons of water and all kinds of unknown chemicals into there under high pressure, and it cracks the shale, and it allows the natural gas to come up. Problem is that the chemicals they're pumping down there get into the water supply, and you've probably seen footage. There's a movie called Gasland where people who had fracking going on. Their neighbor was doing this fracking, and they literally turned on the tap water in their kitchen and if they lit a match, the water would catch fire. So that's a problem. That's a serious problem. Plus, the water that goes down comes back up, and it's not treated. It goes back into the river. So there's just unknown and side effects, and we don't know what the chemicals are. And there's literally thousands of these wells, these being drill sites all over Pennsylvania and upstate New York, and they're just proliferating, really without any kind of control. There's no regulation at all.
Well, you talk about this so calmly, and I'm sitting here, it's hard not to get angry, and I like that you don't point the finger personally or as an organization against other organizations, but how do you stop from pointing the finger when it's like they're causing the problem?
Well, you file a resolution as a shareholder, and you go and you speak at the Exxon annual meeting. And in the case of the coal companies last year, just so you get some perspective, to get 3 or 5% of a shareholder vote is considered quite good. And in fact, that's enough that the SEC allows you to refile the next year. So just so you understand, usually a vast majority of the shares are held by management. In the case last year where we filed with these 2 coal companies, one of them in Montana and one in Michigan, the first one we got a 40% vote, and the second one we got a 43% vote.
In favor of
our resolution.
Wow.
The year before, we got the first ever majority vote, a 51% vote at a utility company in Idaho called Idacor. So
wow.
The shareholders are waking up to it. They're going, wow, this is a problem. When the Tennessee Valley Authority had, I don't know if you know much about coal ash, but let me give you the 2-minute version. In the United States, we make 130 million tons of coal ash a year, and that's just the residue from combustion. That's what's burned, and that's also what comes out of the scrubbers. So all the stuff that's not going into the air because it's being scrubbed is in the ash. And so it's got to go somewhere. And so what they do is they mix it with water, and they pipe this slurry out into these fields, these ponds, they call them. They're very large. Sometimes they're 1,600 acres. I mean, we're talking a large pond. They hold 2 to 3 billion gallons of this toxic sludge. There's no liners in these, and so those heavy metals go into the water. There's some sites where all the wells in the town nearby are just have traces of arsenic, because there's arsenic, mercury, lead, cadmium, all these different things, heavy metals in this slurry. So one of these ponds in a little town called Kingston, Tennessee, it burst through its retaining walls in December of 2008, and it just buried the town, and it got into the river and just made a real mess. And cost over $1 billion to clean up. They're still cleaning it up. There's 50 lawsuits pending. So when we went to this utility in Michigan, our resolution said, as shareholders, we see what happened in Tennessee. We see that this town was destroyed. You guys store your waste exactly the same way. What are you doing to mitigate against a catastrophe like that happening? Now, when you put it like that, the other shareholders look at it and go, yeah, what are you doing about that? And 43% of them voted for the resolution that said, we want a plan. We want to know what your plan is, how you're storing this stuff. What are you doing? What's going on? So just the awareness that these ponds exist. I mean, there's over 2,000 of them around the country. I mean, basically, it's like having 2,000 love canals all over the United States that nobody's aware of. People living right next door to them aren't aware, and the cancer rates near these are, according to the EPA, are 2,000 times the acceptable risk. That's the equivalent of smoking 10 packs of cigarettes a day for people living near the site. It's 1.5 million children living near these sites. So there's just the idea that this is waking people up to the fact that these companies are not being responsible, yet they're following the law. That's the other thing, is that there are no regulations on these. And right now the EPA is considering a regulation of closing all these ponds, dewatering them, and not storing it in this way anymore. We'll see if they have the gumption to actually put that rule into effect. We hope so. We've been working very hard to to get them to see that this is very important and that the people around the country really care about safe American communities. And so these are some of the issues that we deal with on a daily basis. Now, how do you impact the change? Well, there's many ways, and one of them is a shareholder resolution. That's telling the company straight out, this is what we think is the problem. This is how we want you to change. We don't want you to use bisphenol A in your products. We don't want you to store coal ash in this way. That's one way. We think of it like a chess piece, and one angle is a shareholder resolution. Another angle is reputation, the brand. So, for instance, we filed with Starbucks, and we said, as shareholders, we think that you guys should recycle some of those 4 billion cups that you put into landfill every year. Well, wow. Starbucks, everybody sort of thinks of them as pretty green, and when that came out in the Seattle Times and the Wall Street Journal, and recently there's a big article in Fast Company, that gets them upset. That gets them, because their brand is very important to them. And when people say, wow, Starbucks isn't that green, they call us up pretty quick. And they say, all right, what do we do? And we say, well, let's figure out a plan for how we're going to start to recycle. It might take several years. There's a lot of issues, technical issues around the types of cups you use. So brand reputation is another way to get a company's attention. Another way is straight on litigation. And we do some litigation in California under Prop 65, which is there's 803 specific chemicals that are known to be cancer-causing. So we litigate on there, and we also work with other groups that litigate on clean air, clean water. We're going to be starting to do more of that. Potentially, we're actually getting involved with a class action lawsuit. So there's litigation. And then there's other ways of affecting consumers. And a consumer... consumers not buying something has a big impact, like that bisphenol A baby bottle example. It literally went off the market. And consumers have the ultimate choice. If they're educated and they don't buy something, the company's going to change. So we see all these different angles coming at a company, and so there's, back to the chess analogy, there's one square that they can move into, and we call that square integrity. And it's not where they necessarily wanted to move to begin with, but it's the place where they can go. And once they go there, then life is much better, because they are, well, first off, they get the PR around making the change. Second of all, they're not hurting their customers. And and third of all, just as human beings inside the corporation, they feel a lot better about themselves. So, we see it as a very positive thing to move them in this direction.
Wow, actually, real quickly, Andy, if you could give the backstory to the baby bottle thing on how quickly that happened, that decision was made because of consumers.
I don't have actual data on that, to be honest. I know this was before I was part of As You Sow. I just remember seeing it in the press and seeing, wow, it's in baby bottles. I knew it was in Nalgene bottles, and I stopped using, personally, my Nalgene bottles. And Nalgene went out of business. So... but
and then everybody stopped buying the baby bottles.
Everybody stopped buying the baby bottles and the sippy cups. And so, now I don't even... when you go to the store to buy a baby bottle, it's not going to have bisphenol A in it. And the interesting thing is, just last week, Dianne Feinstein was working on the bill in the Senate, and part of it was it's for a Safe Food Act, and wanting to ban the use of bisphenol A, BPA, in sippy cups and baby bottles. And it was going to be in there, and it had been really fought over for quite a long time. And from what I hear, one call from the American Chemical Consortium just to some senators, and it was taken out of the bill. It's no longer in the bill. It's not being considered. And yet that product doesn't exist anymore. So you look at how just behind the times government is. Government, not only are they years behind just trying to put a law in place to ban something that the consumers have already essentially banned, but then they can't even get that done because of industry pressure. So you look at it and you go, well, the consumers that are very powerful, and that we need to be very careful about our choices. And so, the stuff we're doing with bisphenol A right now, we actually filed with Coca-Cola because there's bisphenol A in the lining of Coca-Cola cans. In fact, most cans, we just published a study. You can go to asyousow.org and you can you can download a report that we just published on all the companies that sell food in cans and what they use for the liner of the can. Because, Coke would just eat through the metal in a matter of minutes. It's really it's an epoxy resin on the inside of the can. Tomato paste, tomato sauce, things that are acidic take a lot longer than Coke, but they also will eat through the actual metal of the can. So we're trying to get these companies to find replacements, to use alternatives, and we're recommending people be aware of that and be aware of what the companies are doing. And we grade them. We grade the companies from A to F on what they're doing, how they're planning to do it. We tend to start our campaigns in that way, is where we get interested in a subject and then we do a lot of research. We figure out what is really going on there. Everything we do is really based in very good scientific research. And we'll go out and we'll figure out best practices, talking to all the companies and listening to what they do. And then we'll publish a best practices report that also gives metrics. And then a year later, we'll go back to all the companies that helped us establish these best practices, and we'll ask them, how much of these best practices are you actually using? And then they'll get graded based on the metrics that they established.
That's great.
And then we see who are the leaders and who are the laggards. And so the companies who get an A will tell the companies who got C's and D's, say, what's it going to take to be an A? And oftentimes they'll say, well, here's our 5-year plan to get to be an A. And we say, that's great. Companies that say, go away, we file shareholder resolutions with and say, we want a plan of how you're going to get to be an A. So we kind of methodically do this, and you can get actual entire industries to shift in this way.
Wow.
It's very much, the work is very deep in the weeds. It's on a company by company, issue by issue basis. It's not a magic wand to change the world en masse, and it takes time. It took us 8 years to get all of the electronics companies to agree to have recycling programs. But they do. And we check in with them and we see what they're doing, and now we're starting to work with the companies who actually take the electronics to make sure that it's being properly recycled. Now there's standards for how you take apart these equipment, how you get the metals off the boards, that they're not just loading it into a ship and sending it to China where they burn it. We're very tenacious, and we go all the way down the supply chain to make sure that that's being done. Good.
No, well, I was gonna say that I wanted to talk about the grading system real quickly, but we're gonna take a really short break and come back to it. We are talking to Andrew Behar, who is the CEO of As You Sow. To learn more about this environmental advocacy group, go to asyousow.org, and that's asyousow.org. What a great organization, and what great things that they're doing for the good of all of us. And you can be a part of it, and we'll ask Andrew before the end of the show here how we can get more personally involved. He's already given some ideas as far as if you're a shareholder of a company already, you can get involved. But people, just regular people, can get involved, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But they also are starting a funding program, which hopefully we'll get to talk to Andrew about that. So you can go to asyousow.org and see if you would like to donate to the programs that they have going. That's the place to go. If you like the programs that we're doing, you will find many more at lifechanges.ws, where you'll find, at the moment, 86 other interviews that we've done live on the radio at the BBS Radio Network every Monday night at 7 p.m. we're actually working on a network where we'll be able to come together with members and in groups and in messaging boards and spread this kind of information around. And we hope that Andrew will be a part of that or at least his organization to bring out the information that we could help be a part of and share how we can help, and also bring us aware, bring us up to date to some of the things that they are doing and that are important to us as civilized peoples of this world. So remember to go to lifechanges.ws, or you can find us on Twitter or YouTube, and of course on Facebook. So, Andy, I was going to say, when I used to get a bad grade in school, getting the bad grade, even if it was just a C, or sometimes even a B, was bad for me and sad for me, devastating. But it wasn't half as bad as having to share it with my parents. That was the worst part. I could live with the grade if nobody else knew about it. But if I had to share it with my parents, that was devastating. So I'm just wondering, is there a way that we could get these grades on every product that these companies put out, or on some annual report that comes out that would go nationwide or worldwide that says Starbucks has gotten this grade, and it would actually show the people who are out there getting A's and A pluses and all of that, but it would maybe make people think twice, like you said about the branding, about improving their grade or slipping on something and not caring if they get a C or a D or an F.
Well, I mean, we publish them. For instance, we just put out this bisphenol A called Seeking Safer Packaging. It just came out a couple of weeks ago. We did a webinar, and it was in USA Today. It got picked up a lot of media, and I think companies like, I'm just looking at it right now, Hain Celestial got an A, and Costco got a D. Coca-Cola got an F. 4 companies didn't respond, and so they got extra Fs. I think that it comes down to really what this gives us is a way of figuring out which companies we need to talk to and we need to work with. We also just came out with an apparel report where we actually looked at how the major brands who make apparel, Gap and Levi's and Nordstrom's and everyone, how they actually deal with issues around human rights down at the factory level. And that came out as well, and that one also, we did a webinar. We publish these, and then we do a webinar, and we put them out in the press, and they get picked up. A lot of industry trades pick them up. Once in a while, they get picked up in the major press. So it's, the questions. There's a lot of people they publish books. You can take into the store and you can see what the truth is. You pick up a can of jelly and you realize, wow, this is a multinational corporation that also makes missiles, and there's a lot of work being done in this area that just you go into basically any product you buy and you can figure out what is their environmental record. Do they have a corporate responsibility department? Have they put out a sustainability report? What's their carbon footprinting like? I think that's all available. The question is, do people use it? Or is it just a very small minority of people who really care enough to do that? And I have to say that, the more I'm deeply involved in this, the more I see that people in general are very unaware and want to remain that way. People are in a state of distraction and fear right now. They are very busy, worried about the economy and other things. But just the fact that so few people even voted in the last election, to me just shows that everyone is extremely distracted and just, not connected into this in a really personal way. And I think that's where it's got to come from, is everyone actually looking at what they're buying and what they're doing and what they're putting into their bodies. Because when you start to learn about it, you will stop doing it. I assume that people don't want to expose themselves to toxic chemicals and things. So maybe that's an incorrect assumption as well. I mean, people smoke. People know that's bad. So it's the bigger question. It's the bigger question of how to get people to actually apply this in their daily lives on a very personal level, and how to spread it to their neighbors, and how to change the world in that fundamental way.
Andy, I think you're correct. It is all of what you said. I agree with 100%, and yet at the same time, I also think there's ignorance in that. For example, people have been smoking for many, many, many centuries, and so smoking may be bad, but for one's health, I'm not going to argue that, but the chemicals that are in cigarettes today were not present thousands of years ago. So whatever bad was smoking, or whatever okay was smoking, now has become worse and not so okay because of what's in the cigarette. So if consumers knew, if maybe the approach that you're taking, saying, well, you don't, if you don't want to give up smoking, then don't give up smoking. But here's a cigarette that doesn't have all those chemicals, and it won't, kill you right now, as opposed to maybe years from now.
But I think we're talking about a real consciousness shift. I mean, I think that people, they'll realize, they'll have an epiphany, and then they can't turn around. You look at this happens at a corporate level also. The examples of Ray Anderson and Interface Carpets. He had this epiphany. He read a book and he had an epiphany and totally shifted the way this carpet company was going about their business, and laid out a 20-year plan, and he's pretty much hitting his targets, and he's now the number one floor covering company in the world, and he does everything sustainably.
Right.
Sierra Nevada beer, I mean, zero waste. They're amazing. Patagonia, you know the list of these companies who have in their DNA is sustainability and really thinking through the whole system of their product, of how they market it, and people respond to that. I mean, all those companies are doing incredibly well, and so, but you don't see 100 companies, rushing that direction, and that's the question: is why not? If all the companies that have gone sustainable, that have thought this through in a systemic way, that have that are conscious companies, if you will, why isn't that part of everybody's plan? And that's the bigger question. And so we're out there to remind companies that aren't the most living in a state of integrity that there's things they could improve, that there's very specific things that they could take action on. And that's, it comes down to as simple as, McDonald's. Why are you serving coffee in styrofoam cups? Just that's a known thing. Jamba Juice. Why are you still using styrofoam when you have recycled cardboard in 70% of your stores? But it's not a policy. It's only where people force you to do it. You have a solution. It's done. I mean, and likewise, frankly, all these electronics companies, they're required to do full recycling in Europe. That's just the law in Europe. And they've been doing it for years. So it wasn't like a mystery of how to achieve these things. They just needed a little nudge. And a lot of that nudge was their, American consumers looking at their brand and going, wow, why isn't Apple doing this? And and eventually getting it up to the board level and up to, a CEO who's willing to say, okay, let's bite the bullet. Let's do this. It's actually not as expensive as it looks, and we actually end up saving money, making money, and it's all, it's win-win. So there's an attitude shift that happens at a certain point.
Well, it's a win-win-win because the planet wins and we win as a civilization and the companies and shareholders. I'm so glad you're out there doing this. I'm so grateful, and I like it. I like you. I like what you're doing. I like what you're saying, and can't wait to have you on to say more. I could ask questions for hours, and I know you'd have great answers for them, but I know our producer, Mark Lejeune, is waiting in the wings with a question that's burning right now. Mark.
Okay.
I'm not sure burning is the best word to use, but yes, I've been waiting in the wings. Andy, thank you for all your insight and everything that you're doing, the energy that is as you sow. My question is, we've talked about, or I've heard you speak of, the culture from a consumer standpoint, but I'm curious if you have yet, or what your thoughts are in regards to affecting change at a human resource level, meaning a lot of what you're asking these companies to do kind of requires people to buy into the need and or to be like-minded, unless, of course, it gets to the point like the styrofoam cup where it's so obvious and it gets into the dollars and cents. But have you, or are you moving in a direction to really look at adjusting the human resources at the top end of some of these companies and trying to get a more like-minded leadership in place? Has that been a necessity or thought process?
We've done some shareholder resolutions around corporate governance where the CEO is the chairman of the board, and that's a lot of people have done that particular resolution to at least split that power, because it tends to be if one person's just really adamantly against change and occupies both of those positions, it's very difficult to get change throughout the corporation. Generally, most of these companies have a CSR department, a corporate social responsibility department, and somebody who's leading that department. In some cases, they are very empowered, and they have the ear of the CEO, and they're able to make changes. In other cases, they're completely disempowered, and it isn't until we raise some red flags, till there's some articles in some newspapers about some problems, that the management, the executive management, really looks and says to the CSR person, "Hey, we got a problem here. Go fix it." And then the person becomes empowered as a result of our activities. So each company is very different, and the cultures are very different. And I hope that as they begin to make changes and see that it's not as painful that as they thought, that they can start to put it into their annual budget just to make improvements. I know of companies who just simply say, okay, we're just going to be decreasing our carbon, and they have a line item in their budget for how they're going to figure out how to do that, and every year they do, and they beat their targets. And I'm happy to see that there's that kind of consciousness is starting to creep in on some major corporations are doing this. Reduction of water, that's huge. Bottling plants and water is really a very constrained resource, and it's going to become the major issue in the next few years. You'll see, there'll be more talk about water than carbon pretty soon, because there's just areas of the world where the groundwater is just disappearing rapidly. So we have hope that this culture just keeps on growing, and that companies that are making stuff. I don't know whether you've seen the story of Stuff, but it's a great little movie it's on YouTube, and it's really quite brilliant. It's made by a friend of As You Sow, is Annie Leonard, and it's really talks about just how much stuff do we need, and the whole consumer society, and the whole way, if we don't go out and buy tons and tons more stuff, we feel like we haven't done our national duty to keep the economy running, but just how it's just a big treadmill, and how you can really live with a lot less stuff and have a lot less waste. And the whole notion of waste is another one, that we're starting to look at. We've just started a work in what's called extended producer responsibility, or the short is EPR. And what that means is to really look at not just recycling, not post-consumer, how do you deal with the waste, but actually to design a product so there is no waste. And, the analogy is a forest has no waste. It's like the trees, the leaves fall and branches fall and they degrade and the nitrogen goes back into the soil and makes new. Humans have this concept of waste that's very outside of nature, and that we could design products that simply have no waste. But it's going to take thinking that through. And ultimately, if a company has to reclaim the product at the end of its life, then they're going to design it so that it's really easy to disassemble and make it back into another product. So there's ways to incentivize this, and I believe that people are very clever and are going to figure out ways to literally get down to zero waste.
Mark, that was a great question, and thank you, Andrew. There's so much that we could say to this, and we just don't have the time to do it. So we're just going to have you on again and again, and I look forward to that. In the meantime, I want to remind everybody that we have been talking to Andrew Behar, and his organization he's the CEO of As You Sow. And to learn more about him, of course, you could always go to lifechanges.ws, but you can go directly to asyousow.org. Andy, thank you so much for what you're doing and for being on the show, sharing this information with us all.
Sure, my pleasure, and thank you. Thank you for what you guys are doing.
We're very proud to be doing it, and we're doing it together, I feel. Mark, thank you. This was quite a great addition to Life Changes.
Well, it's something that we'll, I'm sure, be addressing a lot more. Change, sustainability, corporate responsibility, all the things that As You Sow stands for is paramount to everything we talk about, the ongoing shift in consciousness, the change in programming, the building of new habits, all the things that are near and dear to us, and the stories that we talk about every week, in one way, shape, or form, touch a lot of what As You Sow is up to. I'm proud to have them on the show.
It's interesting, but I get the feeling in listening to Andy that little by little that he talks about the DNA of some of these companies, and when he and I were talking before the show, he said that he's trying to get into the DNA of companies that don't already have this and implant that, so to speak. And it almost seems like at some point it's just going to be a no-brainer and everybody's just going to get it.
I think that is the case. It's some of this, when you look at the underlying premise of how we're living, I think you get to a point that things just become obvious. There are things that we do today that are much different than our older brothers or sisters or our parents or their parents, etc., because things just become obvious. And that is what an expansive life is, right? That is expansion, it's growth, it's an expansion of consciousness, that the more we open our eyes, the more we see, the more that this becomes obvious. So that is part and parcel to, I think, what is saturating culture, but obviously what is happening in the executive ranks and throughout all areas of business.
So it almost seems that the people that are working in this area to get people to quote unquote change, at some point that there won't be a need for that anymore. And then it's silly.
That's what we can hope, right? At some point, change will have reached such a critical mass that the change agents hopefully will just continue to it'll be maintenance rather than change, and the ongoing and ever expanding improvement that is consciousness.
And there again, I'm assuming that there's an end game to this, but then again, we know there isn't.
Well, do we know? An end is in a beginning, or is always a beginning. So it depends on how you define it, and I guess we'll learn as we go. So we can only maintain and expect the one, we like to say, the one and true constant, which is change.
Well said. Well said. Where I was going with that is that, okay, so now we know, like, for example, we can make better airplanes and that don't consume as much fuel, and then we think we've arrived, and somebody else says, yeah, but if you think you could fly, you could actually fly to New York on your own without an airplane. Oh, okay, well, then we have to go there, and then somebody else millions of years later will say, if you just think, you just appear there. It's like, oh, really? And then we might be the ones that say, no, but we like to fly there with our arms or something. You know what I'm getting at?
Well, yeah, we won't have the other problems that we're going to have to go through between now and then, like getting yelled at by your neighbor because you left your teleporter in his driveway.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't wait to see yours. But in the meantime, we have to wait till next Monday to have this conversation with our audience. I have so much enjoyed this, and thank you, Mark, for being a part of it. Thank you all for being a part of this. Want to remind you all that we will be here on Monday at 7 p.m. on the BBS Radio Network to do yet another Life Changes with Filippo radio show. Today's show has been made possible in part by our sponsors, Ion Ways Water Systems, Change Your Water, Change Your Life, and Love and Miracles. And to learn more about them, visit our sponsor page on our website and click on their links. I am Filippo Voltaggio, and it is my pleasure having served by hosting Life Changes with Filippo today. I, along with our segment hosts and producers, Dorothy Lee Donahue, Mark M. Lejour, and Mark Greger, and our engineer, Seth Hendricks, thank you for joining us and being part of this show and being part of the change we all wish to see in the world. Ciao, everyone.
You have been listening to Life Changes with Filippo Voltaggio, with the Master of Change. Listen live every Monday night at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and visit us on the web at lifechanges.ws. Also, you can follow our community on Facebook at Life Changes. Once again, join us here next week as we consciously explore and embrace the only constant, life changes.